Hey guys, welcome to the Groves Church Online. My name is Pastor Bob Bickford, and we want to welcome you. We thank you for stopping by and looking in. And so you are going to see our online service, which is different from our in-person service. Every week we gather in person at 10 a.m. and we learn about God, we sing songs, and we help people take their next steps with God. So we would love for you to join us. We realize for some of you, this might be the first step towards that. And so thanks for checking it out. The message will come after a couple of songs. The whole online service will be about 30 minutes, and we'll give you an opportunity to respond. So we invite you to stay tuned till the very end, and then we would like to hear from you. On the screen, you'll see a QR code and an email and a contact information piece. So you can scan that code and you can fill out that contact form, or you can email us or call us and let us know that you have a question, or just let us know that we might be able to help you in some way. That's what we're here for. We're in the community for the community. We want to help people take their next steps with God. So we are glad that you stopped by. We hope that this is encouraging to you, and we would love to hear from you. So thank you for joining and watching this morning.
My heart to sing thy grace, streams of mercy never cease, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet sung by flaming tongues above. Praise his name fixed upon of God redeeming love. Here I raise my Ebenezer, here by thy great help I've come, and I hope thy good pleasure safely to arrive. Jesus saw me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He to rescue me from danger interposed his precious blood. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor, daily unconstrained to be. Let thy goodness, like a feather, bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, take and seal it for thy courts above.
Hey guys, good to see you. We're going to talk about true greatness today, and I want to ask you this question right up front. When you think of greatness, what comes to mind? Most typically, we think of somebody who's really skilled at a particular task, or they have an incredible ability. They may be able to influence a crowd. They may be able to get people rallied towards a cause. They may be able to accomplish great things. When you think of true greatness, what comes to your mind? Well, for some, and for many of us, we would say greatness is a function of power and a function of skill. And then we might begin to evaluate our own lives and say, you know what, I don't feel very powerful in any particular way, and I don't feel very skillful in a particular way. So when we define greatness by the things that we do, we often feel like there's always somebody better. And here's the truth. There probably is. right? There's probably somebody better at a task or has a gifting or an ability that they're going to pass you and surpass you. But greatness is a function of many things, and it's not just a function of what you can do. So one of the questions we have to ask then is, what is greatness? And what does it take to truly be great? Oftentimes it's easier to define what greatness is not by looking at leaders or people who are not great. Reggie McNeil has a book. It's a little bit older book, but I think it's one of the best books on leadership and self-awareness that I've ever read. It's called Practicing Greatness. And in it, he gives us some examples of leaders who are not great. So let me ask you to think about and reflect upon people in your life, maybe leaders, bosses, teachers, professors, anybody who is in a position of leadership or authority who might have exhibited some of these characteristics. And this is by way of saying these are not great characteristics. Sometimes we meet somebody who is an insecure leader, and so what they might believe is that everything is about them, and they're always concerned about their standing and their platform, and so every action, every piece of information, every decision is always filtered through this idea of, I've got to protect myself, because they're insecure. Another leader that we might meet is the visionless leader, a person who really doesn't know where they're going and can't really tell you what you're there to do. Somebody who lacks a passion and a purpose. And when you are around a person who just really doesn't have much of a vision for their life, you feel sort of lost. You feel sort of just uninspired. And so we often will see visionless leaders. Another leader is the incompetent leader. If you've ever been around a person and wondered how they got the boss's position at the table, right? How were they named head of this group or team or organization? Why? Because they lack skill. They lack the what you would think would be the basic skills and knowledge to lead a group of people or to lead a department. And sometimes we run into people who are simply incompetent. We might meet the selfish leader who wants to advance their own agenda and will sell their team out and talk bad about their team and use their experience leading a group of people only to step to the next rung of authority. And we've met people who are selfish. The chameleon leader, a person who changes with whatever last conversation or influence they've had, whatever direction that they feel like the group wants to go, that's where they all of a sudden want to go. They find themselves in a position to just match the group consensus. It's a lot like the next leader, the political leader. The political leader is somebody who just doesn't want to offend, and they always want to maintain the ability to influence, and so they will never take a definite stand on one particular issue. And it drives those people who are under their authority just crazy. Another leader that we might run into is the controlling leader, a person who has to have everything in a particular way, who has to have everything done a certain way, a person who asks and checks and rechecks, a person who really doesn't want you to lead but just wants you to do and wants to control people and things and scenarios and situations. Lastly, we might run into somebody who we would call the absent leader. Person who's never really around, never present. They have the leadership position, but you're just not quite sure where they are. Now, all of these leadership characteristics don't define greatness, and honestly, they make me think of Michael Scott on The Office, right? You just think of somebody, how did they get this position? How did they get put in charge? But we need to ask ourselves, hey, what does it take to be great? If I was going to be great, if greatness was going to be embodied in a person, if I was going to pursue it, what would it look like? Could I be great even though I'm not a person who has what I might think are a lot of skills or abilities or talents in a particular way? What does greatness look like? What does true greatness look like? Now, Jesus' disciples were always talking while they were traveling, and they were traveling on foot, and they were headed towards Capernaum. And one of the conversations that took place as they were on their way to Capernaum was, who's the greatest? Can you imagine traveling with a group of guys and traveling with Jesus, and Jesus is ahead? Maybe he's with Peter, James, or John. Maybe they're up front, but the rest of them are back a little bit, and somebody goes, hey, among us, who's the greatest? Who's the best? Who's the strongest? Who's the most influential? Who's the one that has the most potential to succeed, right? And so they're arguing among themselves, and they arrive at their destination. And here's what it says in Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 33. It says this: they came to Capernaum, And when Jesus was with them in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, because on the way they had been arguing with one another about who was the greatest. Now, if you're a parent, or if you've ever taken a long road trip as a kid, you know that when you're traveling with somebody over a long period of time, things can get a little dicey when there's a lot of proximity and there's a lot of personal connection. So honestly, we could kind of understand why the disciples might be frustrated with one another, but somebody started the conversation, right? Among us, who is the greatest? Now, Jesus obviously overheard their conversation, and he knew what they were talking about, but he didn't come right out with that. And that's a great kind of tip when working with people. So parents, think about this. If you're dealing with your kids and there's something going on, ask them, "Hey, what were you guys talking about?" rather than addressing it right at the core. Jesus wants to put it back on them. He wants them to confess what they were talking about. And so what we see is that somebody fessed up and said, "Well, we were arguing about who among us was the greatest." Now, it sounds like a silly conversation, doesn't it? Who's the greatest among us? But here's what's true about us. Every single one of us inside, we have a desire to be a difference maker, to be somebody who has an impact, to be somebody who has an influence. We don't start out in life thinking that we want to be nothing and that we don't want to have an influence. Many years ago, there was a commercial that ran during the Super Bowl. I think it was for Monster.com, for one of the internet job places where you could upload a resume and you could look for jobs and people could find one another. And they ran an ad that was really striking, and a lot of people tuned into it. It was a black and white ad that had kids, and they were saying things like this when the camera would show on their face. They would say something like this: "I want to grow up and be stuck in middle management. I want to grow up and work in a dead-end job. I want to be paid an unsatisfactory salary. I want to be overlooked and underappreciated." The point was, they were saying nobody says these things, right? Nobody, this is not their goal. You don't wake up and go, "I don't want to make a difference and I want people just to overlook me and I don't want to be noticed." Here's the reality. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're an extrovert or an introvert, if you feel like you're an uber talented person, or if you're just a person who you might just consider yourself just an average, normal person. Every single one of us wants to make a difference and wants to be a difference maker. Think about this. Nobody is picked to be on a team and never wants to get into the game. Nobody gives a gift to somebody else and then hopes that it is never open. Nobody devotes years of service to a company and then plans when they retire that no one will notice. Nobody dreams of dying and having an unattended funeral. Nobody hopes for a trivial obituary. We all want to be difference makers. We all want to make a difference in the life of someone. We all want to have an impact. And that goes to the core of us having influence and us pursuing greatness. We don't want to just take up space. We want to have an influence. So here are the disciples. They're arguing about who's the greatest. Who's going to have the most impact among us, right? Who among us is the most likely to succeed? Who's going to be named among the Who's Who Hall of Fame? So how do we determine greatness? And this is where Jesus begins to interact with them, and he shows them the path to true greatness. Now, the first thing that they see on the path to true greatness is that it involves being last instead of first. Verse 35, it says, "Sitting down then after they got in the house," and he asked them what they were talking about, and they confessed. It says, "Sitting down, he called the 12, and he said to them, 'If anyone wants to be first, he must be last.'" Now, again, Jesus would do kind of Jesus math, right? This doesn't make sense to us. If you want to be first, be last. I mean, how in the world does that make sense, especially in our culture? In our culture, it's this. It's put your idea out there first. Be noticed. Angle for the best seat in the conference room. Try to get the boss's attention. Take out the competition if you can. Be first. Be first, not last. But Jesus flips it on its head and he says, if you want to be first, if you want to be noticed, if you want to be great, then you should be last. Don't fight for your own way. Don't put your agenda ahead of others. Don't be first in line. Don't always try to grab the place of prominence. You be last. Now, is Jesus saying that we should just be passive and never engage and never attempt to do anything? Is Jesus saying that we should never try to be a difference maker? No, he's not saying that at all. What he's suggesting is that we understand that the path to true greatness is not trying to be the person who's in first place. And he helps us see what the next step towards the path of true greatness is. And it's this, it's to serve everyone. Look at what it says in verse 35. If anyone wants to be first, he must be last. And here he adds this, and be the servant of all. Jesus continues his counterintuitive talk about greatness by saying, if you want to have an influence, if you want to be great, you're not going to be great by being the one who demands to be served. You're going to find true greatness by the one who serves all. Now, the word servant there is an interesting word. It's not the word for slave. There's a word used all throughout the New Testament. Paul describes himself as the servant of Christ, as the bond servant of Christ, as a slave of Christ, talking about a permanence to his relationship. But the word that's used here by Jesus is the word that from which we get the English word deacon. It's a servant who willingly serves, a servant who chooses to serve others. It describes this willingness. Now, the one who serves by choice, Jesus says, the one who serves all, is the one who is truly great. I recall a time when I was in college. One of the things in college that I was wanting to do and thinking about doing was I thought I wanted to go work at a Christian camp. I'd been a camper all my life, and I'd gone to different camps around different places. And I went to this one particular camp in Missouri. It was kind of like this incredible camp where they had all of these great like ropes courses and swimming pools and jet skis and swimming and canoeing and basketball. And I mean, it's just amazing. And then they had all of these people who would come at the end of the day of doing all of their sports and their activities. And they would have a worship service, and they would bring in Christian artists, and they would have great speakers. And kids would have the opportunity to hear about Jesus. And so this camp was like the ultimate for me in my idea. And I thought, I want to spend my life working at a camp, and that's what I thought I wanted to do. So I had the opportunity to go visit that camp with a friend of mine. And he knew the president of the camp, and so we showed up. We come about a few hours before dinner time, and so we connect with the guy who's running the show at the camp. And he's out playing with some high schoolers. They're doing like hacky sack or throwing some ball or doing some things. And so they're all in a circle, and this guy has a raccoon, a baby raccoon on his shoulder. And I'm thinking, this is amazing. Like, look at him, like they're all playing ball. The guy's got a raccoon on his shoulder. This is the president of the camp. Maybe if I connect with him somehow, like maybe this is an in, and my dream would come true. And I thought, this is amazing. And here's what I remember about that experience when we went to dinner. When we go in, and he invites us to sit down with him and his group at his table, and he is talking to us, and he's asking questions, and they were serving. It wasn't a cafeteria style, but it was a family style, so all the food was on the table. And here's what this guy did, and I'll never forget it. He served everybody a portion for dinner. The president of the camp, the guy who runs the show, the guy who's like the dude at the camp, he just began serving everyone. And I remember being surprised by that, because the leaders in my life at that point, one of the things that they did is they enjoyed their position, and people served them, right? People looked out for their interests. But here was a guy who was looking out for the interests of others, and it marked me in such a way that I thought, that's the kind of leader that I want to be. I want to be a leader who serves others. I want to be a leader who serves anyone and everyone. Now, one of the things that we might think is, okay, that sounds like a great plan, and if I understand it right, if I serve anyone and everyone, it's sort of like I'm doing a transaction with a person that I'm serving, that there's some kind of IOU that when we're down the road a little bit and I need some sort of favor back from them, because I've served them, they will now serve me. And that's not what this is talking about at all. That's not Jesus' point here. Jesus is saying, you be a willing servant. You be a willing servant to the people around you without expecting something in return. And here's how he illustrates this. Remember, they're in a house, they're sitting down, they're having a conversation about true greatness. And there's a family who is hosting Jesus and his disciples. And so there are people in the family running around and their children running around. And look what it says in verse 36. It says of Jesus that he took a child and he had him stand among them. And taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one little child such as this in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but him who sent me." What is Jesus saying here? Why a child? Now, in our culture, something has transpired that is a lot different than in the culture in Jesus' time. In the culture in Jesus' time, children were not respected. Children were kind of a nuisance. Children mostly were seen as people who got in the way. They were not valued, right? They were not cared for. And in our culture, a child who is born in particular, we see there's a difference, right? There's the unborn, which our culture largely doesn't value. But when a child is born and a child is brought into our culture, for the most part, that child is cared for and wanted and loved and protected, especially in our immediate setting, right around our church here in this location where we find ourselves. People have become child-centric. And so everything revolves around the child. But in Jesus' time and in that culture, that was not the case. And so it could have been that the disciples might have been annoyed by the children that were running through the house, but Jesus grabs the child and he says, "Whoever welcomes one like this, whoever loves and serves one like this, a child who can give you nothing in return," what Jesus is saying, we should serve and love those whom we can expect nothing in return from. We serve all. We serve the least. We serve the overlooked. We serve the rejected. And when you serve one like that, Jesus says, you're serving me. So let me ask you, what does greatness look like to you in your mind and in your opinion? Right? Jesus says this, if you want to be great, be last. If you want to be great, serve everyone. If you want to be great, serve the ones who are overlooked and the ones who are hurting and the ones that can never give you anything back. That's what true greatness is all about. Philippians 2 says that Jesus left heaven and he came to earth. He left the glories of heaven and the comforts of heaven and he came to earth. He took on the form of a man and he assumed the identity of a servant in order to serve you and me and to save us from our sin. And Jesus is the ultimate servant. See, there's nothing that we could repay him for what he would do for us in taking on our sin and dying on the cross to redeem and restore us to God. Jesus is the ultimate example of selflessness and sacrifice, and he is the ultimate servant. And today, his invitation to you is to be served by what he did for you on the cross and place your faith in him. So if you haven't done that, we invite you to do that. You can email us, you can ask us more questions. We want you to come to an understanding of who Jesus is. And if you've been following Christ for a long time and you're struggling with work and your position and you're trying to angle for things, just realize that when Jesus talks about leadership and Jesus talks about service, it's completely different from the world and the culture. Right? Die to yourself. Be last. Serve everyone regardless of what they can do for you. Let me pray for you. Father, thank you for your grace and thank you for Jesus. And I pray that you would unleash a wave of servants from our church and from those who are listening online, that we might make a difference in the name of Christ for the sake of the gospel in the culture and in the place, in the communities that you have placed us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that he should give his only Son to make a wretch his treasure. How great the Behold the man upon the cross, my sin upon his shoulders. Ashamed I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me